Here in Southern California, everybody is from everywhere else. We only have two things that we share in common: a love for In-N-Out Burger and
Yes.
a love for Disneyland. When I started teaching my history of Disneyland course and would take the students on a trip slash field trip visit to the park, they've invited friends and they've invited, family members. And I had a father pull me aside and he said, "My daughter loves your class. And we've been going through a really difficult time. Today's the best day we've had together in I don't know how long." And when you're able to facilitate that kind of experience as an
Mm.
educator, it just doesn't get any better than that.
You are listening to the 5 a.m. podcast, and today is your day. Welcome to the 5 a.m. podcast. Today we have a truly special guest known worldwide as Dr. Disneyland. Jeffrey Barnes is a Walt Disney historian. He's a best-selling author and motivational speaker who teaches the only accredited college course on the history of Disneyland. Beyond his deep knowledge of Disney's legacy, Jeff is a two-time brain tumor survivor whose resilience and passion for storytelling inspire audiences everywhere. Through his best-selling books, The Wisdom of Walt and The Life Lessons from Walt, Jeffrey shares timeless lessons from Walt Disney's life that help us dream bigger, take bold risks, and overcome obstacles. Whether you're a Disney fan, an entrepreneur, or simply somebody looking for some inspiration, Jeff's unique blend of history, humor, and heart will captivate you. Get ready to explore the magic behind Disneyland, leadership, and personal growth. Now, just before we welcome Dr. Disney to the show, please take a moment to share this episode with three friends. I know this is going to encourage and motivate many of us. And now, Jeffrey Barnes, welcome to the 5 a.m. podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm absolutely thrilled to be with you today.
Me too. I've been looking forward to this for a while. I was thinking about the last time the missus and I got to grace the steps and gates of Disneyland. Always, it truly is a magic kingdom, isn't it?
It is. We're fortunate. We live about 30 miles away. We were there
Nice.
last week. We're going to be there first thing tomorrow morning. And people ask me, don't you get tired of it? And the answer is no. It's the most magical, happiest place on earth. Why would you get tired of magic? Why would you get tired of happiness?
That's right. I mean, people even bring their dogs to the Disney daycare
Absolutely.
as you enter the gates. I mean, it's got to be a fun place for the pupperoos as well as the humans.
It is. And I think that was part of Walt's vision. We had 2,000 amusement parks in the United States when Disneyland opened 70 years ago. But these were parks that engaged us physically, nothing that told stories or, sparked our imaginations or engaged us mentally. And so, Walt's vision was to create a place where parents and children could have fun together. It's a family park.
Yes.
And so today, we have the Disney adults, kids, of course, love it. Families create memories there. Yes, of course, you can, bring your pups and kennel them at the Disney Pound. And it's almost sort of a rite of passage. And, it's kind of like, what does it mean to grow up in America? Certainly in Southern California. What does it mean to grow up in Southern California? It means going
Yeah.
to Disneyland.
Yes, absolutely. And so many great communities close by. I know we've got some friends in Orange, and my wife has a great older friend that lives in Fountain Valley. So shout out to the peeps in that part of the world. Truly a wonderful area, I think, to call home for many. But I wanted to ask you about your nickname, Dr. Disneyland. How did that come to be?
So I was in higher ed for 22 years and always had a dual role: full-time administrator, full-time faculty member. And over the years, I taught 20 plus different kinds of courses. And along the way, I would always find an opportunity to talk about Disney. It didn't matter whether it was a history class, didn't matter if it was a political science course, it could be, a theology class. It didn't matter. And so people were like, "Wow, you're really into this Disney thing," and I'm like, "Yeah, I am." And over time, people were like, "Well, did you get your PhD in Disney?" And of course, the answer is no. Uh, but then when I pitched the idea for creating and teaching a college course on the history of Disneyland, I mean, almost instantly, my students were like, "Wow, you are Dr. Disneyland." And I love alliteration.
Yes.
And, the second I heard that, I'm like, Yes, I am, and, I'm very blessed now. Again, wonderful 22-year career in higher education, but this whole Dr. Disneyland thing has taken off, and now I get to write and speak full time on something that I love and am really, really, really passionate about, which is Walt's story and the way, the park can challenge us to go out and live our own great story.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure too, just the story of Mr. Disney picking Southern California, and I think about, the Queen Elizabeth that's in Long Beach and the Crystal Cathedral started by the late Robert Schuller and
Mhm.
just so many great spots. Of course, for me, whenever I'm down there, I love going to the Magic Castle in
Yes.
Hollywood. What do you think inspired Walt Disney to build Disneyland where he did?
So that's an interesting question, because originally he was going to build what he at first called Mickey Mouse Park next to the Disney studio in Burbank. Originally, there was the Hyperion studio in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles. They made so much money from Snow White that they were able to grow, expand, and build a state of the art studio from the ground up in Burbank. And Walt had some extra land when he started toying with this idea of a place where parents and children could have fun together. Put together some initial drawings. Around 1952, took the plans to the Burbank City Council. And they told Walt no. They didn't want a carnival atmosphere in their town. Well, like any great leader, Walt understood no simply means next option. And so
Good. I like
he
that.
hired the Stanford Research Group, led by two individuals, a fellow by the name of C.V. Wood and Harrison Buzz Price. These are the original Buzz and Woody.
Is that right? Wow.
Correct. And
Okay.
it's the Stanford Research Group that looked at a lot of locations in Southern California, proposed 4 to Walt as being the ideal location for Disneyland, number 1 being the Ball Road subdivision in Anaheim. And the 4 reasons for that are weather. Walt didn't want to be next to the beach. We already had beachside amusement parks, but you go too far inland, it's too hot. Second is freeway access. They were building the Santa Ana or I-5 interstate between Los Angeles and San Diego. Anaheim at the time has 14,000 residents and 60 motel rooms. It's essentially in the middle of nowhere. And so if folks are going to leave downtown Los Angeles, they've got to go out of their way to get there. Third, the land prices were affordable. The citrus industry was in a downturn. And so he was able to negotiate with 17 different owners for that Orange Grove property. And then lastly, demographics. They were predicting by 1986, Anaheim, California would be the demographic center of Southern California. And when 1986 rolled around 31 years later, it was Fullerton 5 miles away. And so those 4 factors all played a part in Walt choosing Anaheim to be the location for his happiest place on earth.
So when people think of California, especially Southern California, they think of Disneyland and the car culture, and I think of the restaurants because I've eaten at a lot of great historic places in that Southern California area. Did Mr. Disney have a favorite haunt for, let's say, a breakfast on the weekend or a dinner or something like that?
Well, first of all, let me stop you for a second because you
Okay.
keep referring to Walt as Mr. Disney. He
Yeah.
hated being called Mr. Disney.
Did he? Oh, that's good to know.
Mr. Disney was his old man, Elias. And in
Okay.
fact, at his favorite restaurant in the park, which was the Carnation Cafe on Main Street, one morning he was being served breakfast by a brand new cast member. And out of respect, she
Hmm.
kept referring to him, just like you are right now, as Mr. Disney. And he
Wow.
finally stopped her and said, "Young lady, here at Disneyland, we only have two Misters, Mr. Toad and Mr. Lincoln. You can call me Walt." And so when you go into the park today and you'll notice all of the cast members are wearing a badge with just their first
Yes.
name,
Okay. I've wondered
that's
about
all
that.
Walt.
Is that right? Wow.
Yeah,
Well, thanks
yeah.
for the heads up on that. Next time I
No
see him,
worries.
I will make sure.
Yeah, yeah. And then what's interesting about Walt and restaurants, he came out to Southern California in 1923 when he was 21 years old and after the bankruptcy of his first studio in Kansas City. And around the same time, there is a restaurant that opens up near where he would end up living in the Los Feliz neighborhood, a restaurant known as the Tam O'Shanter. And
Okay.
this is believed to be the first themed restaurant in the United States. And the theming of that restaurant, which was a favorite hangout for Walt, is very much the theme that you find in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and the theming that you find in Fantasyland when it opens in 1955. And it's interesting to see how that first themed restaurant influences Walt, influences Disneyland. And Walt was convinced that if you give people nice things that they'll want them, that they'll
Yes.
be attracted to them. And so for the 10-year anniversary, he converted the Red Wagon Inn into the Plaza Inn, and people were like, "This is way too fancy. You're spending way too much on furnishings. People don't wanna eat hamburgers and hot dogs underneath chandeliers." Well, today it's one of the best restaurants in the park
Yes.
because Walt knew that we would respond to quality.
Yes. Yeah, and my wife and I have eaten at that very restaurant and had, I think, burgers, fries, and a milkshake,
Exactly.
and that was so great. Was there, a ride or some, let's say, attraction within the park that was Walt's favorite?
It's been said that Carousel of Progress was Walt Disney's all-time favorite attraction. Walt most wanted to be remembered as a storyteller. He didn't want to be remembered for Mickey Mouse, Snow White, or even Disneyland. He wanted to be remembered as a storyteller. And Carousel of Progress, which was originally created for the 64-65 World's Fair and then brought home to Disneyland for a brand new Tomorrowland in 1967 and then shipped off to Magic Kingdom's Tomorrowland in 1975. That's a theater in the round that is a masterpiece in storytelling, and it is basic it's based pretty much on, the play Our Town, which was one of Walt's favorite shows, and so the idea that it tells a story, that it could tell a story in 3 different locations, and that it could eat up all of these guests, thousands an hour without the story or the show ever stopping. Walt was in love with the show, in love with the story, and in love with the technology that made it all possible.
Yeah. And so do you have a favorite attraction? Maybe that's like asking you to pick a favorite child, but
Space Mountain at Disneyland. It's not necessarily what I think is Disney's best attraction.
okay.
If I want to take someone to the park and, blow them out of the water and say, wow, this is, what makes this place so
Mhm.
amazing, probably going to put them on either Indiana Jones or the new Rise of the Resistance. But for me, like what speaks to my heart and says, "Oh, I'm in my happy place," or "I'm home,"
Mhm.
is when I'm on Space Mountain at Disneyland.
Oh, that's neat. When I was very young, I loved the It's a Small World. After all, I loved the song, and so I loved all the little figurines. As like a very young child, you're just mesmerized by all this.
Mhm.
It's been a few years since we've been there, but I would say Pirates of the Caribbean
Yes.
is still you seeing that when you're younger and just having, wow, like there's like the whole animatronics and just working so hard to get you into the reality of the ride.
Yes.
Worth the
Yeah, and there's
wait.
a couple of fun facts about that attraction.
Okay.
One, it was originally gonna be just a rather pedestrian walk through wax museum. That was it.
Okay.
And
Wow.
in the middle of its construction, Walt and his team of Imagineers get distracted and diverted to the 64-65 World's Fair. And it was there that they did 4 different shows to include Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln, Ford Magic Skyway, Carousel of Progress, and your beloved It's a Small World. Well, when they did a boat ride for dolls, the light bulb went on and they're like, "Well, gee, if we can do a boat ride for dolls, we can do a boat ride for pirates."
Yeah.
And so they expanded it into the audio animatronics boat ride that we all know and we all love today. It's also famous for being the very last attraction Walt personally worked on. Walt was diagnosed with lung cancer in November of 66. Given 6 months to 2 years to live, he lasted only 5 weeks, dying in December of 1966. and Pirates opened 3 months later. He did, however, um, see it almost to completion.
It's powerful. The other notable one for me at the park, because I'm a huge Mark Twain fan and Huckleberry Finn and all of that kind of ethos, is the riverboat.
Yes.
Can you talk to us a little bit about that attraction?
So you're talking about the Mark Twain riverboat
Yes.
that
Yeah.
is on the rivers of America. And fun story, you know, Walt was born in Chicago, Illinois, but spent his formative years in the middle of Missouri, not too far away from where, Mark Twain was in Hannibal. Now Mark Twain lived earlier than Walt, but you come into Missouri from Illinois and you cross the Mississippi, you hit Hannibal. If you keep going, you're going to come to this little farm community called Marceline, and that's where Walt lived from age 4 to age 9, and then they moved to Kansas City after the farm failed. Well, Walt and Lily in the 1930s, in the middle of the Great Depression, booked a vacation to take a riverboat cruise. And when they got there, they learned that it had gone out of business as a result of the economic challenges. And so Walt would not get his riverboat cruise until he built the Mark Twain for Disneyland in 19. It was the first steamship built in the United States in more than 50 years. Opening day attraction. But what's even more interesting is the park opened on July 17th, 4 days earlier. Walt and Lily celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary. And so that night, they invited special guests to come to Disneyland, and they were driven down an incomplete and unfinished Main Street, USA, took a maiden voyage on the Mark Twain, and then had dinner at the Golden Horseshoe in Frontierland. And many believe that that may well have been the best night of Walt Disney's life. Because when you get to July 17th and the park opens, everything's a disaster. They call it Black Sunday. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong. But he loved that anniversary dinner, starting with the maiden cruise of the Mark Twain.
Wow. What a special night. That is an event and a night not to be forgotten.
And if you
That's for
look at the
sure.
Mark Twain from the
Yeah.
right angle, it looks like a three-tiered wedding cake.
Interesting. Okay, I'm gonna look for that now. And now I in my research, I discovered that you initially disliked Disneyland on your first visit. Can you talk a little bit about that and then what changed your perspective? And maybe did Walt's story influence that shift?
Wow, these are great questions. So yeah, I grew up in the Panhandle of Florida. I went to Walt Disney World's Magic Kingdom when I was
Okay.
10 years old. Absolutely loved it. Became obsessed with it. But I'm on the other side of the country. I'm nowhere close to California, nowhere close to Disneyland. Ended up moving to the Bay Area, Northern California, to go to grad school. Finally made my way down to Los Angeles and to Disneyland in August of 1988. And my expectations are through the roof. I
Yes.
mean, this is the original park. My parents were here in 1960. I've heard those stories my entire life. This is going to be amazing. And so I go stumbling in at about 11 a.m. on a hot August morning, and I'm looking for Star Tours because that's the newest, latest, greatest. I've seen it all over television for about a year, year and a half. And I knew that Star Tours had to be in Tomorrowland. And because of my experience with Magic Kingdom, I know go down Main Street, USA, turn right, you'll be in Tomorrowland. But I had no idea where Star Tours actually was. And so I asked a cast member, and the cast member replied, "Well, you're in the right place for the ride, wrong place for the line." And I got redirected back to the end of Main Street. And it was more than 3 hours, Michael, before I experienced my first Disneyland attraction. And of course, by the time I'm done, it's 2:30 in the afternoon. It's even hotter. The park's even more crowded. I mean, it was just complete chaos. And I left that night going, I don't get it. This place is too small. It doesn't have the magic of what I remembered from Walt Disney World's, magic. I was just completely out. But I fortunately stayed in California long enough to realize way more than Walt Disney World for local residents in Florida. This park matters to people in the Golden State. And so I got super curious. I had to know why. And, Walt was once asked, what does it take to be successful? And he didn't talk about high school diplomas or college degrees. He said it really comes down to 4 C's, and for Walt, those 4 C's are courage, confidence, consistency, and curiosity. I was fortunately blessed with a ton of curiosity, and so I got curious, and that's where I discovered Walt Disney's story. Wasn't born successful, difficult relationship with his dad, bankrupt at age 21, more failures than successes. No one believed in Snow White. Even at age 53, no one believed in Disneyland. And so I fell in love with that story. And when I went back to the park 3 years later, I viewed it through the lens of that story and the idea that Walt most wanted to be remembered as a storyteller. And from that moment on, I fell in love with the place. I came home that summer and I said, I'm going to write a Disneyland book one day. That's how much seeing the park through Walt's eyes and Walt's story transformed the experience for me.
Yes. Well, and speaking of Walt's, the setbacks that he faced, like you mentioned, the bankruptcy, the upbringing, family relations, were there some leadership lessons from his resilience that really resonated with you the most?
Yes. And this actually comes from Walt's wife, Lily, who went on record to say, I've never seen Walt beaten at anything. Now, I don't know about you, but there's a lot of things that I would like to hear my wife say about me, right? A lot of nice things, a lot of platitudes, a lot of compliments. What an amazing statement. I've never seen Walt beaten at anything. And again, this is an individual who had a very challenging childhood, bankrupt at age 21, loses his first successful cartoon character, which was not Mickey Mouse. The studio was always in financial challenges, and he just didn't care. He just kept moving forward. You know, there's a phrase in personal development, the wake doesn't drive the boat. The wake's where you've been, it's not where you're going. I don't know that anybody demonstrated that more in their life and more in their career than Walt Disney. He just kept moving forward.
Yeah. Well, and there was something about his work and his productions too that really brought the viewer and the listener in. I think of being a young boy and even though, we had transitioned from black and white TV to color television, seeing Steamboat Willie, there's just something about that happy mouse whistling a tune and driving this boat that was just so engaging for me as a youngster. Are there maybe some examples that you have or that maybe some of your students have told you of what really did it for them, just bringing them into Walt's Magic Kingdom?
Yes. So it's interesting because here in Southern California, everybody is from everywhere else. We only have two things that we share in common, a love for In-N-Out Burger and a love for Disneyland.
Yeah. Okay.
And I learned quickly when I started teaching my history of Disneyland course and would take the students on a trip/field trip visit to the park that they grew up going to Disneyland and they grew up with their families and their traditions. You know, I've got to get the first churro. We
Yeah.
have to enter in through the tunnel on the right. We have to exit out through the tunnel on the left, right? And, the power of those traditions and the stories and the memories that they made, with their parents and with their siblings, with their boyfriends and girlfriends, with their significant other, are stories that are going to last them a lifetime and probably stories that are more powerful than many of the lessons that they were paying to learn in a college classroom. And I remember one particular young lady, whenever we would do the field trip, they would invite friends and family members to join us at the park. So, you have 10 students on a given day, right?
Yes.
But your group on the tour is like 30 because they've invited friends and they've invited, family members and they all want to be in class that day. And I had a father pull me aside and he said, my daughter loves your class and we've been going through a really difficult time. Today's the best day we've had together in I don't know how long. And when you're able to facilitate that kind of experience for a father and his daughter as an educator, it just doesn't get any better than that.
Thanks for watching the show. Just a reminder that you can get all of our resources, other episodes, and read our blog posts at 5ampodcast.com. 5am Podcast is brought to you in part by mkci.ca, a certified member of the Autodesk Developer Network. MKCI helps companies maximize their AutoCAD, Inventor, Navisworks, and other design software investments. Their innovative products like the CommandSys script editor and the Clash Management Suite will streamline your workflow and boost your productivity. Visit mkci.ca today to discover how they can enhance your competitive CAD advantage. That's mkci.ca. Thank you for your support of 5am Podcast. Yeah. And just that simple conversation probably encapsulates what Walt wanted for his visitors when they would come.
Oh, absolutely. Walt wanted to put us into the story so that we could experience the emotions of the story. And some of those are negative emotions because stories require conflict, and some of them are positive emotions. But he wanted us not to escape, but to experience the feelings of story. And the best example of that is in the original dark rides in Fantasyland. When the park opened in 1955, opened with Snow White's Scary Adventures, Peter Pan's Flight, Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, and fortunately, all three of them are still here to this day. They were never created to tell the entire story from that particular movie because the rides aren't long enough. But instead, they were created to evoke the emotion associated with the story. So Snow White's Scary Adventure is all about fear and danger. Peter Pan's Flight is awe and wonder. Mr. Toad's Wild Ride is humor and comedy. And what's even more interesting is originally the heroes or the lead characters from those stories weren't in the attractions. There was no Snow White, there was no Peter Pan, there was no Mr. Toad, because Walt didn't want you to be a passive spectator. He wanted you to be a active participant in the story. You're Snow White, you're Peter Pan, you're Mr. Toad. Now, guests didn't get it, and Disney got tired of all the complaining, and so now Snow White and Peter Pan and Mr. Toad can be found in those attractions. The original vision for Walt is, I want you to feel these emotions, and I want you to be the lead and hero in your own great story.
So cool. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'll just take a quick moment to talk about the comment section. It's been such an engaging conversation so far, and I'm sure that you're listening. You're thinking, wait, I got a comment because I got to tell you about my experience at Disneyland. And so many people have momentous stories and experiences, thanks in main part to Walt Disney and his work there. And you were talking about this class. And so, how did an accredited class on Disneyland come to be?
So when I moved to Southern California in 2011, and I had a new job as Dean of Student Success and Professor of Humanities, by and large, I was working with students who were struggling. They had the ability to do the work, they just weren't showing up. They weren't going to class, they weren't doing the homework, they weren't taking the test. And Michael, I could, sit those kids down and talk to them about goals and, what it takes to be successful. And, you got to take responsibility and be a leader in your own life. I mean, those lessons are universal and they're going to tune me out in 30 seconds or less. And I realized they all love Disneyland because here in Southern California, it's the one thing we have in common. And the lessons I needed them to learn were right there in the park that they were visiting on average about once a week. So if I could create a course to leverage those lessons, then that would be an opportunity for these kids to see their own goals and their own dreams come true. Because I don't see the park as an escape. I see it as an example. And what's the point of going to the place where dreams come true if you're not working on your own dreams? And so I wanted to leverage Walt's life and the stories at Disneyland to challenge these students to step up and be the hero, at least in their own college story. And so I pitched what I called my Mickey Mouse idea. There was some pushback, there was some reluctancy, but it took about a year, but I got permission to do it. And it required a syllabus and curriculum and textbooks and guest lecturers and field, all of that. Laid it out, lined it up, and the irony in all of that is I finally got to give the first lecture. And out of any course I've ever taught, like this was my dream course. This is why I'm here. This is my purpose for existing, right? And I give the first lecture. It was awesome. The students loved it. And then the very next day was when I was diagnosed with the first of what would ultimately be two life-threatening brain tumors. And they wanted to operate immediately, gave me the weekend to put my affairs in order, and told me I needed to be back on Tuesday at Cedars-Sinai in downtown Los Angeles for brain surgery that would, require 2 months of recovery. And as a result, like, that would be the end of the course. And I thought about it for about half a second, and I realized the class was never about the amusement park. The class was about obstacles and conflict and, what it takes to be successful despite everything that's happening around you. And I knew this was an opportunity to not just teach the course, but to actually live it. And so I delayed the surgery for 2.5 months so I could continue to teach the course. Eventually had the surgery. Spoiler alert, I survived,
Good.
right?
Yeah.
And it was life changing because I realized that this had become my passion. And that book I had said 20 years earlier that I was going to write,
Yes.
well, now I got serious about writing it. And from start to finish took 142 days to complete.
Wow. That's commendable. For getting that pen to paper and those pages filled with words. So then I want to ask you then the Disney parks, how they serve, I guess, as a blueprint for storytelling and creativity and overcoming obstacles in business and life. Can you talk a little bit about that and maybe how that might have been reflected in your students after they finished the semester?
Yeah. So let's start with a castle or Magic Kingdom style park.
Okay.
Again, when Walt was building Disneyland, there's 2,000 amusement parks across the country. He sent Imagineers to an amusement park convention in Chicago, Illinois, while Disneyland was being designed. They showed plans to the experts in the industry. To a person, they predicted that Disneyland would fail. Walt had no idea what he was doing, and it would be bankrupt, shuttered, and forgotten in 6 months or less. Now, there were a lot of reasons for why they hated the design for Disneyland, but number one is Main Street USA,
Is that right? Wow.
because the original cost to get in was $1, and then it was anywhere from 10 to 35 cents for all of the individual attractions. Well, for all intents and purposes, there aren't attractions on Main Street. And so Walt was spending all of this money on theming, all of this money on landscaping, all of this money on trees and flowers in a space that isn't going to generate revenue. And the shops and the restaurants, they didn't belong to Disney at the time. Walt barely had the money to buy the land and construct the park. The restaurants, the shops, and even the hotel were leased out to third party vendors. And so the experts were like, you're not making any money. You're spending a ton on stuff that is completely unnecessary. And oh, by the way, you can't have a single entrance in and a single entrance out. That's not how amusement parks are designed. But Walt understood the importance of first impressions. How many of those do we get? One, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And he wanted to control that first impression. He wanted to control the opening scene and the closing shot as we exit out at the end of the day. And when he heard that the experts hated the design, that's when he knew he was on the right path. Because he wasn't building another amusement park. We already had 2,000 of those. He was building a theme park. And so the lessons there are pay attention to the first impression, and it's okay to be disagreeable. If you're going to be a leader, you can't do what everybody else has already done. That's management. Leaders take us to places we've never been. And that's what Walt did with Steamboat Willie. It's what he did with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And it's certainly what he did with Disneyland.
Yeah. Wow, absolutely. And so in all of this, as you're talking about Walt and the naysayers coming and people not believing in his dream, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm fascinated by the fact that Walt actually brought his friends along to participate in his success. I think I remember hearing that as he marked out the land, he actually went and talked to some friends and said, "Hey, you've got to buy land around my property." Can you talk a little bit about that?
He did. So it's been said that when Walt was building Disneyland, he quote unquote did not have a friend in the world.
Okay. All right.
because nobody believed in it. He's lost his mind. What is he doing? The amusement park industry is dying. They're dirty. They're filthy. Nobody wants to go there. And he's building it out in the middle of nowhere, Anaheim, California. And he did bring his friends out to the park, to include Art Linkletter, who was a celebrity in Hollywood, was the MC for the program Kids Say the Darndest Things, and was the master of ceremonies for the live ABC television broadcast when Disneyland opened on July 17th, 1955, which he did because he was Walt's friend. And Walt brings him out to the property and says, Art, this is going to be a huge thing. And there's land around here that's available. I can't afford it because I can barely, get the park open, but you should get in. And Art's like, Walt, I think I'm good. And years later, Art Linkletter would walk around, the perimeter of
Yeah.
Disneyland, and every step he took, he would say to himself, "There's $1 million. There's $1 million." There, because he didn't believe what Walt was trying to tell him. And it gets worse. A few years later, when Walt is starting to buy up land in Central Florida and do an East Coast Disneyland, what we know of today as Walt Disney World, they're at a party together. And Walt pulls Art aside and says, "Hey, I'm getting calls every day from cities across the country wanting their own Disneyland. And, we're starting to look, and I've found this location in Central Florida, and this is going to be like 150 times bigger than Disneyland. What do you think?" And Art says to Walt, "You got a good thing here in Southern California. I think you need to leave it alone.
Wow.
I think you're good, Walt."
Can you?
So
Wow. I would not have thought of Art Linkletter as being the wet blanket on somebody's business dream.
But, so many people were. Lily wanted nothing to do with Disneyland. Walt's older brother, Roy, who was his partner, for years and years and years, he would call the banks up and say, "If my brother comes down there to talk to you about that damn amusement park, I need to know about it." And in Roy's defense, the difference between the first studio in Kansas City that
Okay.
lasted 18 months and went bankrupt and the studio today that is the world's largest entertainment company, the difference between those two studios is not Walt. The difference is Roy. So Roy kept Walt grounded. Roy kept Walt from driving the second studio off the financial and physical cliff over and over and over again. And if it weren't for Walt, Roy would have spent the rest of his life selling vacuum cleaners door to door in Southern California. So they needed each other. They were phenomenal partners. And on Monday, July 8th, despite all of his doubt, and despite being one of the biggest wet blankets and one of the biggest naysayers, the very first person to spend the first dollar to purchase the very first ticket to get into Disneyland was Walt Disney's older brother, Roy. So if you believe and take action, people will eventually come around. And I think one of the challenges is we try to convince people that we're right about our ideas. That's not the right approach. All we have to do is convince other people that we believe that we're right about our ideas. And that fire and that passion and that vision will create followers even if they're not yet on board.
Wow. And so do you think there's maybe some notable names that did actually catch Walt's vision and became a big cheerleader for his projects?
Yes. So some of the earliest studio employees, well, one woman in particular, there was a nurse on staff who would help take care of Walt's neck pain and back injury from a polo event earlier in his life and career. A woman by the name of Hazel George. She was from southeastern Arizona. And at the end of the day, Walt would talk about Disneyland. He would talk about this park. He would talk about this place where parents and children would have fun together. She just loved the idea. And so she put together a group of studio backers who would kick in $1 here and $5 there, not really enough to move the needle for building what would be a $17 million project, but enough to show Walt that, hey, you know, we believe in you and we believe in what you're trying to do. And some of my favorite stories is of Walt going around the studio and picking some of his favorite animators and telling them, as of today, you're going to work on Disneyland and you're going to love it. And eventually they're like, what the hell is Disneyland? But over time, they would come to love it.
Man, that's it's so fascinating to get these backstories on the struggle and the requirement for perseverance and resilience. Like this world that we find ourselves in with from my perspective as a Christian, this creator that came and said, I'm putting you in a garden, but guess what? You're gonna have to scratch something out of the dirt and use that brain and come up with blueprints and of on the industrial side of things, and even in my broadcast career we had engineers around, and what would a live hockey game be without our technical engineer? I mean, it just wouldn't happen. But on the Disney side, there's the Imagineers. Am I getting that title correct?
You are.
Imagineers, yes. And so can you fill us in kind of on the backstory of how that came to be and what their role was in developing or helping Walt to develop his dreams?
So initially, Imagineering, which today is the arm of the Disney company that builds the attractions, was originally known as WED. And WED simply stands for Walter Elias Disney. And the reason WED was created is because Roy was terrified that building Disneyland would bankrupt the studio. And so he told Walt, you're going to have to build a second company to protect the studio from the inevitable financial ruin that I know this project is inevitably going to be. And oh, by the way, you can't use your own name because your name is already attached to the studio. And stockholders actually threatened to sue Walt over Disneyland. That's how convinced they were that this was, just disastrous. And so Imagineering was originally called WED, which formed in 1952 and stood for Walter Elias Disney. And they were some of the best artists and best storytellers out of the studio. And some of them, did it part time. Some of them did it full time. Some of them did it volunteer, quite frankly. And one of my favorite stories is Walt was friends and neighbors with an individual by the name of Welton Beckett. And Welton Beckett had one of the largest design construction firms in the United States. And Walt took some of his ideas for Disneyland to Welton and said, "Hey, can you work on this? Because I want to put a park together." And about 2 weeks later, Beckett came back to Walt, gave everything back to him, and said, I can't do this." And he was like, "What do you mean you can't do this?" "Well, you're building, castles and pirate ships out of the middle of an orange grove here in Southern California. That's not what we do." And Walt's like, "You're the leading design and construction firm in the country. If you can't do it, who can?" And Beckett says, "Your own people can, Walt. This is a movie set. So get your storytellers and your movie people to design and build Disneyland." And I can't help but wonder what would Disneyland have looked like if it had been left to the construction firm versus Walt and his storytellers.
Yes. Wow. It seems like there's maybe some parallels between Henry Ford and Walt Disney. Do you think that Henry Ford's story influenced Walt's at all?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, in the late 40s, I believe so. I think these two stories are connected.
Okay.
Walt gets into model railroading, and he and another studio employee go to um, the Chicago Train Fair. This is about 1948. And on their way back, they stop in Dearborn, Michigan, and see the name escapes me, but I was there. I was just there a few years ago. It's where the Ford Museum is and the assembly plant. And Henry Ford built almost kind of a Main Street USA and sort of mini Disneyland there in Michigan. And it's believed that that very much is an inspiration for what Walt ultimately did in Southern California.
That's There's that phrase, busyness begets busyness, but I think that curiosity begets a whole lot more than busyness. So I want to ask you about your books. And maybe before I get into your books, I'll just ask you to let us know how we can get in touch with you.
Sure. So you can find me at thewisdomofwalt.com. You can find me on Instagram at Dr. Disneyland, Facebook, Jeff Barnes. And, feel free to contact me about any question. If you're coming to Disneyland, we'd love to give folks a tour, one of our favorite things to do. And again, thewisdomofwalt.com. I have a free weekly Wednesdays with Walt blog. So if you and or your listeners are looking for a weekly inspiration that is going to motivate them and inspire them to live their own great stories, see their own dreams come true, go to the website under resources, sign up for the blog, and you're going to get some amazing Walt and Disney stories every single Wednesday morning.
I am definitely doing that. And definitely next time me and the missus come down to Southern California,
Don't
we
miss us, Michael.
we are gonna get connected, and I don't know if the original pantry on Figueroa is still available for breakfasts, but we'll at least have to do a tour of the park and have some good eats right there on Main Street, USA. Who needs
Well,
Figueroa?
we can eat at the Carnation
Yeah,
Plaza, right?
even
And
better.
I can call him Walt, and you can call him Mr. Disney.
Yeah, yeah, that is good. Now, so you had mentioned already it took you 142 days to write your first book, and it is a best-selling book after dreaming about it for 20 years. What advice do you have for creatives that maybe they're just struggling to put pen to paper or just to take that first step?
Wow, this is probably one of my favorite questions. And I say that because I know what it's like to be stuck. And I have the opportunity to work now with want to be authors. And it's one of my favorite things to do. So first of all, understand everybody wants to be an author, nobody wants to be an author. Or I'm sorry, everybody wants to be an author, nobody wants to be a writer.
Yeah.
I messed that up, sorry. It's hard work. And the
Yes.
challenge is twofold. One, we think we have to be inspired. We think we have to be motivated before we show up, not realizing that the inspiration and the motivation is a byproduct of showing up. So you have to show up first, and then you'll get motivated, and then you'll get inspired. If you sit around waiting for motivation and inspiration, you're never going to show up and it's never going to happen. Secondly, and this was probably my biggest lesson, you don't have to write War and Peace in one setting. Your
Yeah.
goal in any writing session is to simply write to the next day. And I spent I don't know how long trying to write a perfect sentence, a perfect paragraph, a perfect page, a perfect chapter, and I got absolutely nowhere. And when I got out of my own way after the first brain tumor, after the first brain surgery, and I was committed to finishing this no matter what, I gave myself a minimum word count of 333 words a day. I could always write more, but I could never write less. And I didn't care. They could be D minus piece of crap,
Yeah.
333 words,
Right.
as long as I was moving forward. Because writing is rewriting, and you can't rewrite what you haven't written.
Yeah. Well, that's a good
As
way to put it.
as long as I was moving forward, I knew that I was making progress. And that 33 word habit of showing up every single day is how I completed the first book in only 142 days. And some of the things that readers love most about the book, i.e., the souvenir stops and the hand stamp stories at
Yeah.
the end of every chapter, I'd love to tell you that I was a genius and had all of that figured out before I wrote the first word. That came to me halfway through the writing process. And that's an example of motivation and inspiration coming when you show up.
Yeah. That's right. Inspiration needs a landing pad.
It does.
It needs a landing pad. I wanna ask you because the whole idea of Disneyland being the happiest classroom on earth is very appealing to me because I did not really care for school at all. College and university, that fine. I knew I was getting a degree, but I was paying to
Right.
be there. So how can that idea of the happiest classroom on earth, that concept be applied outside the confines of the park?
By having the mindset of being a lifelong learner. Walt never got past ninth grade in his formal education, but he considered himself to not just be an entertainer, but an edutainer. He wanted to use story. He wanted to use the entertainment medium to teach some of life's most important lessons. Everything in life is a lesson, Michael. We don't have to pay tuition. We don't have to sign up for a course. We don't have to complete any of the assignments or objectives on a syllabus. We have the opportunity to learn if we stop and pay attention to the lesson every single day. I'll give you an example of that. I know that I'm a good teacher. I know that my students enjoyed my classes. I learned how to become a good teacher from all of the bad teachers I had in my formal education. Those were lessons on what not to do. And so rather than focusing on the negative and whining, moaning, and complaining, which is the human temptation,
That
right?
is true. Yes.
Pull the lesson out, apply it, go and live likewise.
Yeah. That's a great thought. We could meditate and roll that around in our brains for quite some time. I want to ask you then, are there some components of Walt Disney's leadership style that was really misunderstood, but yet seemed to knock it out of the park?
Well, components of his leadership style that was misunderstood. Walt did not financially. Let's talk about money
Yeah.
because people today will say no one can afford to go to a Disney park anymore. Well, I wish that were true because when we were there last week, it was mobbed. And we're going to go there tomorrow morning and get our Christmas candy canes. And I guarantee you the line will be long and it will be mobbed. I wish no one could afford to go.
Yeah.
When people find out today that it only cost $1 in 1955, they wish that was the case. No, the park would close at 15 minutes due to capacity issues, right?
Yeah, right.
Um, so Walt didn't care for money except for how he could use it to push the next idea forward. And having said that, he wasn't afraid to make money. And he made it clear he was building the park as a place where parents and children could have fun together, but he wasn't building it just for children. And he was very clear about this. Children don't have any money. So, as much as Walt wasn't about money, he wasn't afraid of money either. And he knew that he needed it to get to the next idea, next goal, next dream. And, there was a long article when he did an interview with a local newspaper in the 1950s talking about how expensive Disneyland was. This is 70 years ago, people were complaining about it. And Walt talked about the value that his park brought for the cost that he charged to get in. And then he compared it to sporting events, and then he compared it to what it cost, to go skiing. The same applies today. The numbers are different, obviously,
Yeah.
but the same principles apply.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, then I'm going to ask you this other question that is more focused on people who are going to be coming to the park maybe this year in the next, I don't know, 2 to 12 months from listening to this podcast. And by saying that, I'm choosing my words wisely because this podcast is going to live on in cyberspace, but Disneyland is going to live on that piece of terra firma that was pegged by Walt all those decades ago. Last time we were there, whenever I would travel for work, I'd stay at Hilton. And so we stayed at the Anaheim Hilton and we were living in the Pacific Northwest at the time. We were used to walking and we were going to walk over to the park and we asked the concierge and she's like, walk, why not just take the shuttle? And so as a result of that experience at our beloved Hilton Hotel, we decided that next time we would pick a hotel in the park. So, what is your pick for favorite in the park accommodations?
The Disneyland Hotel,
Yes. Okay.
because it's mid-century modern.
Okay.
It's the original. It has so much Walt in it. And I love the story. Walt was getting 800 calls a day asking about overnight accommodations because it's 30 miles outside of the city and Anaheim's the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
Well, Hilton, Sheridan, Merritt, none of them wanted to invest in building a hotel for Walt because the park's going to be shuttered, bankrupt, and forgotten in 6 months or less. So Walt calls up a friend, fellow by the name of Jack Rather, who originally was an oil man from Texas, Now he's in Hollywood producing shows like Lassie and The Lone Ranger, starting to get into the hospitality business. He brings Jack out to the property, shows him what he's up to, and then tells him he needs him to build a hotel. Well, Jack looks at the orange groves and how they're out in the middle of nowhere, and he's terrified. He's like, "No, I don't think so, Walt. Like this ain't gonna make it." And with a tear in his eye and on his knee, Walt begs Jack to make the investment to build the hotel, gives him the use of the Disney name, which Walt never did,
Wow.
and a 99-year lease. And that's how the Disneyland Hotel came to be. Fast forward today, go to Walt Disney World in Central Florida. There are so many Walt Disney hotels. There are so many Walt Disney World resorts. If you wanted to spend a different night in a different room at Walt Disney World, it would take you 75 years
Wow.
before you ran out of rooms. And
Wow.
Walt had to beg to get the first hotel built.
Wow. So many stellar business encouragement, entrepreneurial encouraging themes just from the life of Walt Disney. And to think of the tenacity and the being able to say yes when you hear a no. And it's so easy in our world to just fold like a $2 suitcase that we got from a Goodwill or something. But man, this guy kept on going. He's like, I don't know, someone
Never
who
beaten at anything.
never beaten at anything. What a thing for your spouse to be able to say, and just to have that mindset of just keep going. It doesn't matter. These people can't see my vision. And that's what I'm thinking when as we're talking, that he just must have renewed himself in that vision constantly, time and again.
Absolutely. And he would be scared. He took an Imagineer out to the construction site about halfway through the building of Disneyland. And he pointed out that half the time was gone, half the money was gone, and there wasn't anything that he would charge anyone a nickel to see. And he said, "I'm not going to lie, I'm scared." And the next morning he got up and went right back to work. He just kept moving forward.
And what an example to live by. Jeffrey, I cannot believe that our hour has gone so
It went fast.
quickly. Man, thank you so much for sharing these stories and your insights with us today.
Well, thank you, Michael. And come see us in Southern California. Would love to give you that tour and would love to have that breakfast together.
Yes, absolutely. And I got to say thank you so much. Your passion for Walt Disney's legacy, your personal story of resilience, and that inspiration that I know I'm feeling. I'm signing up for your newsletter as soon as as soon as we're done the recording here. But just to inspire us all to dream bigger, to keep pushing forward, regardless of the obstacles and the naysayers. So my sincere thanks, of course, for you being here. And for those listening, be sure to check out Jeff's books. I even had quotes, ladies and gentlemen, that I was going to talk to Jeff about from his books to get his feedback on. So you're going to have to buy the books. Start with The Wisdom of Walt. It's a whole series. There's some great information. Also, you can explore the courses and presentations at thewisdomofwalt.com. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I am sure that you've enjoyed this conversation, because I know I have, and Jeff has. So
Absolutely.
share this with some of your networks, and maybe all of your networks, and subscribe to the 5 a.m. podcast for more inspiring stories and practical wisdom to fuel your entrepreneurial journey. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure to have you here. It's been a pleasure to have Jeff here. And thank you so much for listening. Thank you for being here. Until next time, please keep dreaming, keep creating, and remember the kingdom that's within you. Please seize your days, enjoy those sunrises and sunsets and all those beautiful adventures in between. I'm Michael Clausen. Thanks for watching the show. Just a reminder that you can get all of our resources, other episodes, and read our blog posts at 5ampodcast.com. 5am Podcast is brought to you in part by mkci.ca. A certified member of the Autodesk Developer Network. MKCI helps companies maximize their AutoCAD, Inventor, Navisworks, and other design software investments. Their innovative products like the CommandSys script editor and the Clash Management Suite will streamline your workflow and boost your productivity. Visit mkci.ca today to discover how they can enhance your competitive CAD advantage. That's mkci.ca. Thank you for your support of 5 a.m. Podcast. Need morning momentum? 5 a.m. Podcast, Wednesdays, 7 a.m. on WDJY 99.1 FM.